And I think in particular black women, but I think women in general. So for white women, it's color. That we live in a society that's defined beauty as a very narrow thing, female beauty, and I mean all over the world. And that very narrow definition is that femaleness somehow is connected to hair that is straight and long and grows down. And when you're a black woman from West Africa, your hair doesn't grow down, it grows up.
Word.
So because we live in a world that says to you, this is not what's beautiful, you then spend a lot of time and effort and money trying to approximate that, what the world calls beautiful, which means you put chemicals in your hair, you put horse hair, you put all kinds of things.
Dead people's hair.
Which I think is problematic.
Yeah.
Because, should I stop?
No, don't stop.
And so, I started thinking about this a number of years ago because, and I suppose it's because I left home, I left Nigeria. I think maybe if I hadn't left, I wouldn't have started thinking about, why am I putting chemicals in my hair and burning my scalp, and why do I feel ashamed of leaving my house if I don't have long, straight hair falling down? And why have I internalized the idea that my hair, the way it grows from my head, is a problem that I have to solve? And at some point I decided to stop straightening my hair, but also to start talking about it, because I think that there's very little, I think that the wider world, the non-black world, knows very little about black hair. And so we attach all kinds of meanings to it. So when you see a woman who has dreadlocks, people might think, maybe maybe she belongs to a strange cult or something like that. Or a man, and they say, oh, a Rastafarian. But it's not necessarily the case. It might simply be that they like their hair, the way it grows from their heads, and they don't want to have to put chemicals in it. And the reason I think it's important to talk about is that there are actually real world consequences to it. So this is true for Nigeria, for the US, for the UK, and I'm sure for many countries in Europe. If you're going for a job interview, for example, there's a very narrow definition of what is professional hair. And if you're a black woman and you decide to wear your hair natural in an afro or cornrows, there are many people who would consider this unprofessional.
Oh, yes.
And your chances of getting that job would be reduced. And the people making the decisions don't actually know what your hair looks like when it grows from your scalp.
So true.
So for me, it's important that we, I've heard from many people who've said to me, oh, we didn't realize that black women's hair isn't quite that. Or people who say that it always shocked them that black women's hair grew so quickly because they would have long braids on one day and the next day short braids. And also I think that in the US, Michelle Obama, who is a woman I deeply admire and love, if she decided before Obama won to
we have a small break to translate.
We're hanging on every word.
That Michelle Obama is the word. I'm Michelle Obama's biggest fan, and if she, before Obama won the first election or even the second, if Michelle Obama suddenly decided that she no longer wanted to straighten her hair and appeared in cornrows, Obama would have lost the election.
Yes.
I think this is very true because or if she came out in an afro, because then all kinds of meanings would be attached to it. You would have not only ultra right-wing places like Fox News, but even so-called centrist places saying things like, that hair is political. So often it's said that people might say she's a Black Panther, or
Angela Davis,
or that she's somehow dangerous because it suggests that you're not respectable to have cornrows. And even the children, because when you see the two young Obama girls, early on they would have their hair in braids, but now they almost never do. And you can sense that it's also about portraying the image of black respectability, which somehow doesn't include cornrows and dreadlocks. And so really it's just to say that it's not just hair. Yeah, it's not just hair.
You could throw in everything there, or what?
Because I think that it was the only way. I had many things I wanted to say about race and wanted to say them in a particular voice, and there's an immediacy to blogs that just seemed the right way to do it. I think it would have been very different if Ifemelu wrote a book or if Ifemelu wrote a newspaper column. It wouldn't have the same immediacy, and I don't think the voice would have worked as well. But I think just being a bit more objective, it was also really the only way, because it wouldn't work in fiction if Ifemelu said all of these things in conversation. It just wouldn't work. And so really, objectively, it was the only way that I could have her let the reader know these opinions, and also in many ways what I wanted was to try to get the reader to think. And yeah, I think it was important as well that it had to be anonymous, because I think if it hadn't been anonymous, then there would be a lot more of an interest in who is saying rather than in what is being said. And I wanted the focus to be on what is being said.
Wichtig war für Melo das, she reacts quickly, often ironic, sometimes harsh. But what she also does is she takes a step back. She analyzes and looks at the situation and then writes it. Was this the way you coped with situations and experiences you made while being in the US for the first time?
Not so much. I think my life wasn't as interesting as Ifemelu's. So my experiences really, I mean, I wish they had been like that, but not really. So but I've always been, and I think this comes from being a writer more than anything else, is that I've always felt one step removed from things, and so I'm always watching. I'm always watching and listening and observing, but I'm just always sort of watching, and I take notes all the time. And so I don't know that I necessarily dealt with things in the way that Ifemelu does. I do think that many of the opinions she has in the blogs, I share most of them. I share about 80% of them. I agree with her about 80% of the time. So it was easy to write, because it's easy to write if you feel the same way, and these are observations that you've made yourself. But I didn't, and almost everything in this novel is based in some way on something real. But not so much things that I experienced, but also things that other people experience. So I would talk to people, ask questions, or people would tell me their stories, and I would write it down. And I just knew that I was writing it down because I wanted to use it in the novel. I think what I'm not quite sure I understand is what the connection is to, because really the whole idea of that narrative of Africa Rising is, and this is one of the things I find interesting about it, is that it's much of the language we use in describing ourselves comes from somewhere else. And so the idea of Africa Rising is something actually quite external, and it's also a very narrow definition. It's very economic. So people talk about things like growth, which nobody really knows what it means, and people throw numbers around, and we're all supposed to be joyful about this narrative of Africa Rising, and you know, of course, we all want our countries to grow, whatever. But for me, there's a problem with making your definition of progress be based entirely on economics and on strange, often unfamiliar ideas of economics. So when they tell you things like you have to devalue your currency because that's good for you and growth, and nobody's thinking about, you know, it means that children won't get to go to school and won't get healthcare and that kind of thing. So my feeling about the narrative of Africa Rising is it's not something that I feel a part of. I'm much more interested, not in telling positive stories, I'm interested in telling true stories. And I'm not ashamed that Africa is a place that has good and bad. And I think in challenging the stereotype of Africa as a place of terrible things, you can also go in the other extreme where we start to deny that there's still problems, and we start to think that this very narrow economic definition of growth is all we need. I don't know if that comes close to answering the question that I didn't entirely.
Also es gab Schwierigkeiten, hier oben die Frage zu
well, I take this as one confrontation. And it's not the first. When the book first came out in the US, a Nigerian woman said to me, "You've told them all our secrets." And you know, I mean, and it's I think it's a fair. I mean, if I'm confronted by that, I think it's fair, right? But I would do it again if I wrote the book again. but I think it's important though, because I mean, there are many people who live in these countries who have no idea what the complexities of immigration are. They have no idea.
Yeah.
And I think I think people should know. I mean, of course, I hope that my brothers and sisters don't get arrested when they're but you know, I do think that it's something that, because it's Obinze, for example, who in the novel goes to England and is undocumented. There are many people who said to me that they couldn't imagine that a young man who, you know, is middle class would have those problems, because they don't. I think that the realities are so removed for many people in these countries that it's hard to conceive of. And so there are many people who said to me that it was eye-opening to read Obinze's story, and they couldn't believe. And I know people who said, is it really that difficult to get visas and that kind of thing? And I'm like, yes. And also it's important to talk about, you know, I think it's a way to start a very important conversation about immigration. I mean, really. So while I kind of apologize, but not really. I think your question is something that I've heard quite often from Nigerian women. It's interesting to me how people react differently to different parts of the novel. So in Nigeria, many women want to talk about the marriage. And so they'll see family broke it home. And how much time do we have? Because I can go on and on about this. I'm not advocating broken marriages. However, I think that it's important for us, and particularly for us as women, to start to really actively think about this idea of women stealing men. I don't think that, oh, she broke a marriage makes any sense. A man is not a piece of wood that you can pick up. A man leaves a marriage because he wants to leave a marriage. And I think that the reason this kind of broken home talk happens quite a bit is that it's women blaming women. It's a kind of internal negative thing that we've been raised to think about. And I really don't like it. And so, you know, it's that Obinze made the choice that he was happier somewhere else. And you know, Ifemelu happened to be interested as well, and you know, they're adults. And
Yes,
I mean, the idea somehow that broken home is something that Ifemelu has done. It's problematic, I think.
Husband snatcher.
Yes. And the husband, nobody says anything about the husband.
He was waiting to be snatched.
And you know, but really, I think it's a larger gender question, really, about how we constantly and continuously excuse men, and somehow women are held responsible.